Hola, soy Patricia Gómez. Bienvenidos. Nancy Hernández, de Hispanic Collaborative, analiza los datos del censo sobre la fuerza laboral hispana. En una conferencia de prensa que tuvo lugar en MTC, varias organizaciones, incluyendo las de los estudiantes afroamericanos y latinos, así como el Sindicato de Trabajadores Local 212, presentaron una declaración en contra del racismo a la comunidad de MTC y un reportaje más del sueño americano por Mariano Avila. Hispanic Collaborative es una iniciativa que tiene como objetivo llevar a los hispanos de Milwaukee al 10º lugar en el índice de bienestar. Nancy Hernández, presidenta de esta organización, nos explica el significado de los datos del censo y revisa asuntos como el del incremento de población y la fuerza laboral hispana.
So the Hispanic Collaborative, it's a relatively new organization, really only got together a little over 2 years ago. And so the Hispanic Collaborative really came together as a way to move Milwaukee into a top 10 city as we compare ourselves against the 50 other top metros in the United States as a place for Latinos to thrive and really have positive outcomes. So that's what the goal of the Hispanic Collaborative is. How do we focus on moving Milwaukee into a top 10 city? And we're doing that by focusing on increasing Latino-owned businesses, increasing civic participation, and upskilling and reskilling our Latino population from the contributions and jobs they're in today to areas that are more in demand where they can earn more money for their households.
The growth of Latinos is all over the United States, and that the growth in general in the country can also compare to other countries in the world, that we are like the 7th place in numbers if we were independent as a population of the U.S. Can you talk about that?
Throughout the United States, Latino population growth is fueling growth everywhere, and that's not any different right here in the state of Wisconsin, as well as in our region and in our county and in our city. In between 2010 and 2020, the state of Wisconsin grew by 200,000 individuals in population change. But if you start looking at the figures underneath those, what actually happened is we lost 100,000 Caucasian individuals, and Latinos made up that number and then some, and that's what we really see happening. At home in Milwaukee County, Latinos, we lost about almost 60,000 Caucasian population. We lost over that decade. But Latinos made up about another 30,000. And so we see that happening. They're responsible for, upwards of 70% and to 100% in some cases of growth. And we see that in counties all around us, even in ones where we might not expect it.
There are some observations related to the age of Latinos and the power to create more dynamics in the economy. Can you talk about that, Nancy?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about the fertility rate, or how many children is a certain population having, just to maintain our population, the same number, a group has to have a population fertility rate of over 2%. If you think about how numbers happen, how people come to be, and Latinos in the U.S. are the only demographic that's over 2%. So Latinos are having children, and that's where a lot of our growth comes in. It's not from migration or immigration. A lot of it is Latinos that are born right here. To 40% of our population under the age of 18, about 10 years younger than the rest of the population. And what that means is that we're a very important demographic. If we think about working age population, which is necessary to grow economies and have prosperity in a region, we're a big part of that. And we're going to continue to be a bigger part of that because we are so young and we are still growing.
Now, let's look at the job side. What are the observations that you can share with us?
And we can also think about that in terms of Latinos. And so if we were to take US Latinos and just measure their GDP, what is their contribution? How much are they producing and making for the United States or in comparison to the world? US Latinos, their GDP is tied for the seventh largest in the world. And so they're under countries, they're tied actually for seventh France, I believe. You know, they are growing, so we're gonna surpass France shortly.
The participation on civics. What does it mean, Nancy?
We know that civic participation and voter turnout, our population, how often they are not just registered to vote, but actually voting in elections, we know that that is correlated to how well people do. And if we think about that being equal to engagement, that being equal to sharing their voice, that being equal to sharing what they believe in terms of policies and process and procedure that's important to Latinos, that's where that correlation comes in. And so voter turnout is one of those numbers that we look at, but it also has to do with, for instance, the Hispanic Collaborative, along with other organizations, was very involved in pushing for aldermanic boundaries in the city of Milwaukee that reflected the growth of the Latino population that we're seeing here.
Some numbers regarding the position of Milwaukee on the well-being index. Are we moved from the 39th to the 44th place now?
We track 18 different variables in that one comparison number. And I will say that we increased in 18 out of 20 variables, but not fast enough compared to how well other areas might have been improving, other cities. And so our ranking actually slid from 39th out of 50 to 44th out of 50, and that's where we are today.
So does it mean that we are moving further away from improving our living conditions?
As it compares to those 50 other metros, yes, and that's what we're really doing. But we also want them to be better as it compares to other areas. And so how can we make this one of the best cities, one of the top 10 cities for Latinos to be in when they have choices of about 50 other metros in the U.S.?
Another element that you mentioned is important for Latinos to move up in that well-being index is to participate in businesses.
And the pandemic hit us really hard there. We have a lot of small businesses, but I'm afraid not enough. We actually are 50th out of 50 when we compare ourselves just on that variable. So we have a lot of room to move. One of the things that we were able to do during the pandemic is get Mercado MKE off the ground. It's a marketplace where you can find Latino-owned businesses. We want to support them. We want to make sure that they have access, online selling capabilities, and you can find over 100 local Latino businesses. That's one way that we're able to help and contribute, but that's an area that really needs a lot of our attention, and some of that is by choosing how we spend our dollars and investing in Latino-owned businesses.
Education is the other element. How do you see Milwaukee doing?
Pipeline for Latinos going into higher ed is increasing, but we also have limitations there. We need to figure out how to close those gaps, and that depends that we track and is important to us. We're looking at how do we increase the median household income of Latino households here, and one of that is that education level. We are still 20 percentage points behind Caucasians in terms of what percentage of our population has a bachelor's degree or higher.
Regarding Latinos supporting retirees in the USA, what can you tell us about that?
We have a lot of folks who are retiring. Our boomers retired, are retiring, and more each day, and so we have a lot of retirees. And if we think about the jobs that it takes, whether it's service or professional, to sustain our population that isn't working, that's an important role that Latinos play. Without Latinos, well, today we have 100 workers support about 34 retirees. The American work support about 50 retirees. And so if we think about our workforce being tight right now, and a lot of even our small businesses having trouble finding employees, that would make it even tighter. So we're playing a very big role in supporting our growing number of retirees in the United States.
Is there something important that you would like to mention that we have not considered yet in this conversation?
I would say that the Hispanic Collaborative is very grateful and happy to be working with a lot of Latino organizations as well as non-Latino organizations on some of these key issues that are important to Latinos here in the Milwaukee region. But what's important to us is important to everybody in the Milwaukee region. And I think that the more we are vocal about that, the more that we vote, the more that we get involved and call folks and share our opinion, the more that we can all help push towards those goals.
En una conferencia de prensa que tuvo lugar en MATC, varias organizaciones, incluyendo la de estudiantes afroamericanos, la de estudiantes hispanos, el grupo hispano Higher Ed Luna, de African American Network y Local 212, presentaron una declaración en contra del racismo dirigida a la comunidad de MATC. Veamos lo que ocurrió.
The MATC Anti-Racism Coalition recognizes that the college has started work through its commitment to achieving the dream and the moonshot for equity.
We believe that each student has a right to learn, to be respected, and to be empowered to discover those gifts.
So it is not the beginning of the work, but it is the beginning of an important collaboration.
To create an anti-racist institution, we must, 1, center the voices of our students and our colleagues who have suffered because of our college's systematic racism.
Finally, the college must be bold in speaking out against racism in the larger community.
Diferentes organizaciones afroamericanas y latinas se reunieron en MATC para formar una coalición en contra del racismo.
I was really grateful to hear their position, acknowledging that the good work that we've started to do. I also acknowledge that we have a lot more work to get done and that we're going to work on it together. We need to listen more, have empathy, compassion for our students, for our employees, for the city that we live in. And so I think that the importance of this institution is being a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
First, let me say that with the so many different organizations, constituencies, that is both the challenge, but more importantly, that's the opportunity. Because with that diversity of voices and experiences all represented well at the table, that's where a lot of the solutions come from.
This is the first time that I've seen or experienced or been involved in these employee groups coming together to support each other and for change.
I think it's a great statement to see that we're united in our goal to really see equity at MATC and in our bigger community, our community at large.
2, provide ongoing educational and professional development. 3, encourage the discussion of race as a part of the curriculum and provide support to educators and staff who are committed to building safe spaces.
MATC is not yet a fair or equitable place to learn or work because of long-held practices, structures, and policies that are built upon a foundation of racism and exclusion.
We must identify and correct misinformation, advocate fearlessly for our students and employees, and be direct and relentless in our demands on their behalf.
And so we have to form new habits that are very intentional about opening space at the table, about inviting people sooner, about centering others, about putting the student voices first, not in a perfunctory way, not at the last second, but from the beginning. And that will make a difference. And it actually has to happen. If we don't do it, when I say we, again, answering your question, then the city will not be all that it can be. And the institution will not be all that it can be.
So we're learning together as an institution about how to get better at this. How can we work together? How do we really understand each other, support each other in an inclusive environment?
I think by having faculty, administrators, staff that are working together, especially members of traditionally underrepresented groups at MATC, I think it inspires the students. It's an inspiration for students that, yes, they are fighting for us at every level, and that they see their struggle reflected in our struggle as well.
4, create and adhere the disciplinary consequences that are consistent for all employees. 5, create advancement opportunities and adhere to benchmarks that are consistent for all employees.
And one of our challenges here in Milwaukee is that we are siloed, segregated, and fragmented. And so building coalition, breaking and working across silos is critical.
Racism, however, undermines our ability to see that potential. As a result, students are undervalued and disrespected. As educators, we must identify and dismantle racism in ourselves, in our curriculum, in our classrooms, and in our institution.
6, develop the institution's capacity to discuss, learn, and teach about the pervasive racism that is present in our practices, policies, and language. And lastly, 7, commit to being sincere and transparent about where we are in our anti-racism journey as an institution, and be open to continuing to learn and do better.
To achieve both fairness and equity, the college must admit to racism in the past and in its current practices.
MATC has the potential for greatness, but we will not achieve it without intentionally, persistently, and fearlessly addressing our institutional history and challenges related to racism.
Where we really have a sense of belonging, welcoming, appreciation for each other, and just a caring environment where people can really excel and grow and change and learn.
When the mission is the same, the mission and the vision drive the responses to the disagreement. And then beloved community, that's something that Dr. King popularized, which is really the same thing. What is the quality and integrity of the community at the table? When the quality is there, the integrity is there, the sincerity, the accountability, the transparency. My experience has been those tables are really effective. So I've had other tables that I've been blessed to lead where that happens. There's agreements, strong disagreements, accountability, but there's a respect at the table, and the culture is accountability. So we work through the disagreements.
Do have members that are serving on different groups at the college, which are working to educate and to address those issues when they occur. But we are here for our students, and we're to make sure that we've got the best faculty, the most student-centered faculty, and if it would happen to be, one of our members that's involved in those, we would of course represent them, but also it's an opportunity to educate them and others.
It's too easy to slip back into kind of the old status quo. So this is a good opportunity to push forward with change.
I also want to let our MATC students know, both current and future, that we are working for change, and our faculty are working for change, and that you're welcome to come here and help us to make a difference in the community.
We see everything firsthand, and it was just time for all of us to just speak out, and so we can get this ball moving a little faster.
And so this particular table that we have that's open to all, it's not an exclusive table. Everybody can come to that table, can bring the voice not only to talk, but to put action steps in place and to move this thing forward.
As a student this past year, especially with the pandemic, BSU has had multiple outreaches and cries for help during this pandemic because lack of resources, lack of diversity, and lack of understanding of not just the African American culture, but the minority culture as whole. Over this past year, we have placed several meetings where students were able to speak up and speak out on their experiences. The Black Student Union did a survey, and in the survey, we asked about students' experiences with racism and racist encounter on this campus. And a lot of students were very unhappy. A lot of students said they experienced racism, not only from peers, but staff and faculty.
Yeah, it's very difficult to listen to students who are feeling this because, of course, we do have great compassion. And it hurts to hear students say these things because this is not the kind of environment we want for all of our students. And when our students do experience this sort of thing, we want to make sure that we really have folks understand it, change behaviors, have the kinds of actions that will make a difference for our students.
You know, if you were to use my basketball metaphors, which I love, you know, you wouldn't have 5 of the same player on the court because you'd be missing some skills, you'd be missing some voice, you'd be missing some culture. And so when we're not at the table, or when you and I are not in dialogue, when I say you and I mean the Black community, Latino community, we're missing out on the learning and the growth that happens by us being together.
A lot of students feel unheard and they feel they have no voice. So as not only just a student leader, but as an African American and a minority, it is my hope that not only are we heard, but action is taking place. Although action is already taking place, this is a call to do more and to do better for not just my organization, not just LU, but students to come and generations to come.
Y ahora les presentamos un reportaje más del Sueño Americano, una serie por Mariano Avila, productor bilingüe de Milwaukee PBS.
Si bien el sueño americano es un término meramente estadounidense, su impacto ideológico ha sido distinto en cada país. Raul Galvan, productor jubilado de Milwaukee PBS, nos explica cómo afectó esta idea a la Cuba de su infancia.
Cuando Turslow Adams escribió sobre el sueño americano, yo creo que parte del concepto es que quería exportar el sueño americano como una manera de vida que la gente debería imitar porque era lo mejor que pasaba en el mundo. Un poco como después fue la Guerra Fría, particularmente en Cuba, que los Estados Unidos abrieron la puerta al país a los emigrados cubanos porque estaban escapando al comunismo. Y ¿sabes? El comunismo era un desastre y querían decirle a Fidel, oye, si el comunismo es tan bueno, ¿por qué están saliendo tanta gente de la isla? El sueño americano yo creo que le dio una manera de vida que atraía a la gente urbana, vestirse como la gente que veía en el cine americano. En La Habana había más teatros de cine que en cualquier otro lugar en el mundo. Y la gente lo que veía era cine americano, oían la música americana, Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra. La gente americana es la que los cubanos querían ver. Así que querían comprar productos americanos como carros, como televisores. Querían comprar electrodomésticos como los que tenían los americanos. Querían viajar a los Estados Unidos. En La Habana estaban a 90 millas de Cayo Hueso. En realidad se podía montar el carro en el ferry en La Habana y bajarse en Cayo Hueso en 6 o 7 horas y manejar hasta donde querían. En los Estados Unidos era como el imagen del mundo moderno, como siempre había sido en Cuba desde los años coloniales españoles. Querían imitar a los Estados Unidos, no a los españoles. Acuérdate que en España en aquellos años había miseria. Los cubanos no querían ir a ver a los toros, querían jugar béisbol. También en términos de cultura, los medios sociales le han dado una imagen de los Estados Unidos y todo lo que falta en Cuba a esos cubanos que tienen su teléfono móvil y un programa de datos bien mínimo que le da el gobierno cubano o que le pueden comprar al gobierno cubano. Hoy en día aún más se quiere ver y se quiere ser como americanos más que nunca.
Para saber más sobre lo que ocurre en la comunidad, los invitamos a que visiten nuestras historias exclusivas en nuestro sitio de la internet Web Exclusives. Y con un hasta pronto nos despedimos, invitándolos a que nos dejen saber sus comentarios por teléfono al 414-297-7544 o en nuestro correo electrónico. Visite nuestro sitio del internet en Milwaukee PBS ORG y en Facebook. Soy Patricia Gómez, deseándoles paz y bendiciones.